Well, let's kick things off. We have a pretty good crowd by the looks of it. And Emily, if you have the committee list and you could read that, and we could have people just say whether they're here or not, that would be great. I can see who I think is here, but there may be folks on the phone.
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you.
Let's see. Nick Mavadone.
Here.
Marnie Morioni.
Here.
Terry Young. Doesn't look like we've got him.
Terry's not going to be able to tonight. He had a conflict.
Oh, we did. Okay, thank you. Emily Searweb.
Here.
Joe Carter.
Here.
Laurie Davis.
Here.
Tricia Switzer.
Here.
Michael Bart.
Here.
Luke Truman.
Here.
Eva Humaniuk. April Fournier. Chris Gray. Ann Hardcastle. Bill Dodson.
Here.
And Jeff Levine or Levine, sorry.
Here.
Okay, sounds like everyone. So next we have minutes from the last meeting. Are there any questions about the minutes? Ask for a motion to approve the minutes. Would somebody be kind enough to make that motion?
So moved.
Motion.
I think it was moved by Marnie. Who seconded it?
Laurie.
Lori, thank you. And we, I guess, Javier, you said you're not usually doing roll calls for these, so I guess we could just do a hand, or is there anybody who objects to the minutes?
No.
Not seeing or hearing any objections, then they would pass. And again, next on the agenda, can you help me with what is following that? I just got the project sheet up, sorry.
Yep, we can send it over to Lisa and she can walk us through the rest of the agenda and the presentation. Lisa Sawin from Harriman and Associates.
Thank you, sounds great. Lisa, it's all yours.
Excellent, thank you, Nick, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see everyone. Hard to believe that we are in October already, almost the end of October. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. It should be Portland Public Schools opening slide with Longfellow. Yep, great. Okay, so tonight's agenda, we started off with a great welcome and approval of the minutes, so thank you for that. We will then review the GC, which stands for General Contractor Prequalification Process. We will look at the Green New Deal referendum question, also known as referendum question C, and provide an update on last night's community forum. And we'll look at schedule, next steps, and we will adjourn for the evening. So General Contractor Prequalification Process. The pre-qualification process is put into place so that we can make sure that the general contractors that are bidding on the projects are qualified to construct the work. And so some of the things that we look at in this process is we look at past experience, that they've had experience building schools before. We look at bonding capabilities, and we also look at resources and their availability to do the work. So essentially what we do is we have a document that we advertise telling people what the projects are, what the construction time frame of all the projects are, and those that are interested and qualified submit their qualifications. This will be done this month, and then we review the qualifications and we notify those applicants that have been deemed qualified to bid on the projects. Then we advertise for the bids, and we have the bid documents available. That's going to take place in December, and the bids will be due in the beginning of next year. Once we receive the bids, the lowest qualified bid is who the project is awarded to. And we take that acceptance of that contractor bid to the school board. And if the project is within budget or under budget, we will move forward with executing a contract with that contractor. If for whatever reason the bids come in over budget, we then enter into what is called a value engineering process. So we notify the lowest bid, that contractor, and we ask if they would be willing to engage with us in a value engineering process. And what that is where we look at where are those areas we might dial back the scope in order to save money to execute the project within its budget. Once that process has been executed, we've arrived at what those items are. We then will take it back to the school board for approval. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. For school board approval and get the contract executed with that contractor. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions on the process that I just walked through.
I have a quick question. This is Bill Dodson.
Yes, Bill.
Who manages the advertising and the qualifications as they come in and the review of those qualifications? Is that you guys or who does that?
That's us in collaboration with Portland Public Schools.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yep. Not seeing any more questions. I'll move on to the next slide. So we will look at the Green New Deal referendum question. And so this is a question that is coming up for vote in November. And if this referendum is passed, we'll go over what the impact is to our projects or potential impact to our projects and what sort of things we are investigating right now to, if at all possible, be ahead of it. So the areas that this referendum question impacts are twofold. It impacts the construction of the projects, but it also impacts our design. So under construction, the requirement for contractors to hire a certain percentage of workforce as apprentices. So that would require that a contractor have, and I believe it's about 10% of their workforce is apprentice. And so our understanding right now, and again, we continue to learn more and more about this every day, is that if there aren't enough apprentices available to meet that threshold, that may be something that's taken into consideration. But that is how the referendum is written, that's a 10% threshold. The other item in construction is wage rates to comply with state and local fair wage rates, which isn't really a concern. That's something that's been part of this project from the beginning. The third is requirement that employees, and so when they say employees, they're talking about the contractor's employees, undergo OSHA training. And that is a pretty typical requirement in construction, so not too much reservation there. Project design. So how would this referendum impact our project design? So there are two major areas that this referendum impacts. One is around energy performance, and that's looking at the Maine Uniform Building Energy Code and sort of a requirement to exceed the energy performance beyond what is required now. And there are new requirements around LEED certification in regards to they've indicated a different rating system, a different version of that rating system. And so essentially what that means is if this were to apply to our projects, it would require us to redirect our design efforts and to address the building envelope and HVAC mechanical systems and reduce spending on educational spaces and additions. So it really causes us to relook at what we have presented to date and potentially reallocate funds within the project to address these measures. The other one that impacts the project design that is part of this question is the requirement for Better Roofs program. And what this is where we need to set aside 15% of the roof to be solar ready or vegetated roof. And the impact that has is the weight of those solar panels and the weight of that vegetated roof. We need to make sure the roof can support that. But if it's also regarding solar, we also have to make sure that the electrical infrastructure can support that future project. This is a lot easier to do on additions, especially the larger additions, because we can get closer to that 15% mark on those additions. And we can design the addition and the structure to be able to support that weight. We can also look at the modifications being done to electrical and make sure that we have provisions for that. I think it's trickier when you have just renovation projects with very little to no addition. So with the additions we're currently showing at Longfellow, we can probably get pretty close to that 15%, but it's something we have to lay out and study to make sure that we can comply with that. And it's essentially making sure that the roof area is not in shadow for those solar panels. In regards to the timing, we're not clear on the timing of when this will take effect. Our understanding right now is that if it is passed in November, it would begin 30 days from certification of vote. So that would put us early December if that was true. And we'll go over here in a minute kind of what we're exploring to possibly try to get ahead of that if at all possible. The referendum language does not say if there is forgiveness for projects already in design. The language indicates Director of Planning for the city can forgive the requirements on grounds of infeasibility from a technical perspective, but does not specify forgiveness for projects already in design. So what are we doing? We are currently exploring the following steps. Portland Public Schools is consulting with their legal counsel on opinion on the applicability and options available to the district. And we're also looking at, is there an advantage to expediting the submission for the building permit? So if we are under substantial review with the code enforcement to get our building permit, would that allow us to be well underway so that this does not apply to our project? And so that's something that we began to explore, and it really has to do with the planning board submission process. And I know I said building permit, but really the planning board has to be has to approve the projects before we can apply for the building permit. So we really have to start there first. And so Presumpscot, Longfellow, and Reiki all have different planning board requirements based on where they're located and what the scope of the project is. Presumpscot and Longfellow do need planning board approval. Reiki has a staff review, so it's a little bit different. Presumpscot and Reiki, the full submission has been submitted to the planning board as well as the conditional use. Presumpscot, we have heard that they have everything they need. We're just waiting to understand when we'll be on the agenda for the workshop and hearing with the planning board. And so those are those areas in green that you see around these submissions. Longfellow, everything has been submitted. We're waiting to hear if they need any additional information from us so that we can then receive indication that we will be on the agenda for a workshop or hearing. And then Reiki, we're in communication with them about the process for the staff review and how long that will take. The sweet spot that we need to hit in order to get all of those approvals behind us so that we can apply for our building permit and have the building permit submitted with enough time to possibly have it well under review to where this may not apply, would really be in the beginning and middle of November. And so we are in active conversations with the planning board right now to see kind of where we stand it's very tight, and we really can't control what happens in this process. So everything would have to fall into place in order for us to be able to come out the middle of November, submit for our building permit application, and be under review before this referendum or ordinance change occurs. And so this next graph is just really showing that, even a minimal slip of a couple weeks will push us past that date. So really just showing the impact that if this is passed, it really looks at, and it does apply to our projects, and we have to move forward with it. We really need to look at, re-examine the scope and how we reallocate some of the scope to address this. At the same time, we're speaking with legal counsel to understand all the nuances of it, as well as looking at what are the areas that we might be able to work to get our project through the approval process so that this does not impact the scope that we've already presented. We still are going forward with the LEED certification that we've always talked about, but this would impact it even further. So
Lisa, Lori had her hand up first. I'll let you follow that.
Lori. Yes, Lori.
It's essentially, this is probably a good point to talk about it. You sort of reference the fact that there would be an impact. Can you give me a sense of the size of that impact? Are we talking about having to devote enough funds to comply should we slip, or it's determined that this applies to our project? What does that really mean for the project? Can we still build the addition? What's the size of stuff that have to be eliminated? I think it's really important for people to know that now, not after the election. And we've still got a couple of weeks. So being kind of vague, I realize some stuff you may not know for certain, but I think people need to know, is this going to really substantially impact this program and the other two schools?
Correct. No, it's a very fair question.
I'm hearing in what you're saying that yes, the answer to that question is yes. And we've already scaled this back so far from what was originally envisioned when we brought buildings for our future to the public, and at the point that we pass the bond, are we really going to be in a very difficult place if this gets passed? I realize it's the same, it's the citizens of Portland and they can do what they want to do, but I don't think people are connecting these two dots.
Yeah, and all fair and good questions, Lori, and we're trying to put together all the pieces as fast as we can to be able to say, here's the exact impact.
I'm asking for seat of the pants because I don't want to hear the exact on November 4th. I think the public needs to know now, seat of the pants. Because in construction, I've done a lot of construction, homeowner kinds of stuff. But, it's like if you want to do your kitchen or bath, it's going to cost seat of the pants here to here. Does this really endanger our ability to, even with a straight face, meet the promise to the public to have equity, which I think we're already slipping pretty badly from what was originally envisioned, having been on the board when that was the case? And I think we owe the public the answer to that question.
Can I take a crack at that, Lisa, and then maybe move into the specifics and all that? I think, we genuinely don't know. It could be very significant if, in fact, the provisions apply, at the sort of like the worst case scenario for this. So if we, sort of at the worst case scenario, the LEED requirements that we've been having to adhere to, which were just for the new construction portion of the work, if it extended to the full building, it would be a very significant impact. Okay. The solar, if worst case scenario, if it's installed and, with all of the electrical upgrades, it could again be a pretty significant, cost. The flip side of that is if the current lead requirement that it's just applicable to the new construction were in place, then it probably wouldn't affect us that severely. If the requirement for solar is that 15% of the roof be set aside for future installation of solar technology, in both Presumpscot and Longfellow's case, it wouldn't be a significant impact because the new construction that we're having in both of those buildings would be built to specifications that would allow for that to happen. So worst case scenario, it could be very significant. Best case scenario, it wouldn't be, but that's what we're trying to parse out in the next week to be able to have a more definitive understanding. And to your point, we want to be able to do that before the referendum vote so that people understand what those implications are.
I think we need to at least alert people that there is a worst case potential because people are voting now. I mean, my ballot is signed, sealed, and hasn't been delivered, but it will be. Yeah. So I can't open it up and change my mind. Yeah. And I think this is a real concern. I'm also concerned about the solar being told the board has looked at solar. I was on the operations committee. We made a choice not to go building by building, but to participate in a larger solar farm effort. This is like telling us to do something we actually figured out was not particularly the way we needed or wanted to go. And that I think is one of the avenues that we're exploring is, in fact, as as you were on the board when we did that we've bought in along with the city to a solar project that, that reduces our carbon footprint by 2/3. So, in essence, we've already done this. Yeah. So I think that as the attorneys have been talking about what are some of the strategies to sort of to respond if, to the previous slide, we're not able to get under the line, then those are among the strategies that we're looking at. And honestly, we only learned about this and, its implications 10 days ago. And since then we have been working, working hard to, Harriman did the first analysis. We had that conversation with the District Advisory Building Committee at the last meeting. That's gotten some public, it's been in the newspaper and things along those lines. So we are, we have, since we learned about this, tried to make this a more, tried to raise the potential impact of this. But the language for these has been around for quite a while because the council, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, voted on whether or not to include it in the ballot quite some time ago. So it's not like the language in these is a big surprise to anyone. So I guess I am a little surprised that Harriman didn't flag this a lot earlier because, this should have been, it's clear this was headed at, could have the potential to have an impact on our projects, given the language that's been known for some time. Am I correct, Nick?
Hey, Lori, to put your point about people already voting and perspective, about 15 minutes ago, I got an email from the city clerk. They've issued just over 29,000 ballots so far, and they've received just over 20,000 back already, just to kind of put that in perspective.
Yeah, this is essentially, people are voting without knowing that this is an issue.
Yeah. We've got Luke and Marnie up with hands as well, Lisa. I don't know. I'm sure you can see them. Are you all set, Lori?
I'm not sure. So, first. Go ahead, Luke.
Oh, yeah.
Luke was next, and then I think it was Florrie's done, and then I saw Marnie's hand up also.
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you. I just wanted to flag that and not let it sort of wander past, because I think it's really important. I see this as potentially really throwing a very large wrench, and I think we always need to think worst case. In construction, the best case usually doesn't happen. It's somewhere between best and worst. I mean, it just, knowing that this could have an impact, I think is really important, and getting that out to folks. So at least the last 9,000 people who haven't put the ballots in the box yet can do so, can vote knowing.
So I want to mention that there is very little chance that this referendum will pass, and I don't think that we need to be super alarmist about it. At the same time, we must acknowledge that climate change is an existential threat that cannot be overstated. And when we're talking about fixing schools for the next generation, and we're leaving them with a climate that's basically going to destroy the human race, that's something that we need to be aware of. That's not what I'm wanting to talk about, but and we also need to make sure that we're adhering to the city's own decarbonization goals. And Lisa, you mentioned that the biggest issue with adhering to the higher lead requirements had to do with the heating and cooling, and also the roof being solar ready. One, I'm curious what of the proposals that have come through so far, if the availability of incentives have been considered in the present, what has been presented thus far. Also, what percentage of the roof is already solar ready, and if that's just a matter of doing an engineering study to determine what the roof can hold, and the age of the roof and whatnot. And also, having been involved in pretty significant solar array tie-ins, like the electrical upgrades that are necessary is in order to tie solar into the grid is generally not a huge impact. But anyway, if you could talk a little bit about what's been presented thus far, and incentives available, and the percentage of roof that's already solar ready.
Absolutely. So right now, we don't have any incentives that we're aware of that directly apply. We're still looking to see if there's anything out there. The solar itself, this project, we would approach the additions where it makes the most sense. A building of this era more than likely would require a structural upgrade in order to support solar. And it gets pretty intrusive and pretty expensive, and it's money you're just never going to see. And so we're going to, our focus is really on those additions to make sure we can fit 15% of the roof to be able to support the solar there. So that's our approach. And I apologize, you had a third question, but I couldn't remember what it was.
No, it wasn't a question. It was just a statement about tying in solar into the current system. So
correct.
I know that one thing that I know happened with the Solarize Portland campaign, and the students wanted to put a display array on the Deering grounds. There was a lot of neighborhood resistance to that, but I'm certain that we could probably put a remote array somewhere on the property if need be. But anyway.
And I think our understanding, and like I said, we've been trying to find out as much as possible about this, is the way that we've interpreted it thus far, and we're still trying to make sure that this is correct, is that we need to have a design for it. Not necessarily that the solar has to go on, not necessarily that we have to provide the electrical infrastructure, but make sure that if we provide electrical, there is room for this system, and that the design has been done in such a way to where it can do it. So It's not, it's much easier, again, on an addition. And again, we don't have to provide the solar, but just the design is capable of accommodating it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Marnie?
Hi, yeah. I'm actually going to let Bill ask his question first, and then I have 3 questions I wanted to ask about.
Well, thanks, Marnie. 2 quick questions. One is the planning board review and approval process a public comment process? I don't know the answer to that.
So one of the schools, Presumpscot, is required to have a neighborhood meeting because of the level of planning board that it is at, and that was actually conducted last night as part of the forum. And so that period is behind us, and essentially we then go into the workshop with the planning board and the hearing from here.
Okay. So the Longfellow part is not going to be another public forum for the planning board part.
Correct. There's no requirement for a neighborhood meeting.
Thanks. The other part of the question was about the 15% of a roof. Is that the entire Longfellow roof, or is it just the new construction part?
I believe, and we would need to get a clear interpretation on this, it's the entire, including the addition, so overall.
Oh, okay. So that's a different animal then.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll ask my question unless there's anyone else who, I don't see any other hands right now. So my first question was, you may have mentioned this, Lisa, but when you're talking about going to someone for interpretation of this referendum, who are you going to the planning board for that? Or are you going to city council? Who are you speaking, or general counsel? Who are you speaking with for interpretation?
We've been working with Drummond Woodson, with Bill Stockmeyer, has been our counsel on all BFOF related matters, and that's who we've been working with to understand the, what the applicability and our recourse, multiple recourses for all of it.
And could, so Drummond Woodson so who would be the ultimate power? It would be the planning board that would then, if this does pass, they would be the ones that would need to approve. Just trying to understand who is the ultimate power who can decide this.
It's definitely not Drummond Woodson.
Right.
So I don't know. There's different aspects that, exceptions can be made by the director of planning and things along those lines. Lisa, you can help me with that. That's out of my league.
Yeah, the language itself talks about the director of planning for some of the exceptions, and so it would be part of our permit submission. So if it is applicable, it's during that review that they determine if we've met the requirements. In regards to planning board, I think that's something, or in regards to whether it would be applicable to us, that's where we're looking for interpretation, and then can determine what those next steps are as to who would ultimately make that call based on how it's written. Right now, it looks like any exceptions, from what we can tell, is director of planning.
And it sounds like this is already happening, but it sounds like almost like a perfect storm whereby we have this really tight window to get the building permit, as well as the 30 days after if this were to pass. So I'm just curious, Superintendent, if we're already working on drafting a language that would come from the district or the board, the impact that this would have on these projects, and just kind of get ahead of it, just because it just, again, sounds like an extremely tight window to make sure we're making the best case. But it sounds like you are already thinking that way.
Yeah, we're working on that. We're supposed to have a memo from the attorneys early next week.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then the next question was around, in terms of an appeal. I think you already answered that, but that appeal also goes to the director of planning? Or does city council get involved in any way?
I don't have the details on that. I think that, there's, recourse. So we're looking at applicability. So do these particular requirements apply to us, and then how do they apply? So back to my example of, worst case and best case scenario. In the best case scenario, it applies, but it doesn't have a significant impact. So that's one area, applicability. The other area is recourse, and recourse is everything from, what is the timeline that we would need to be able to comply with, to be able to sort of get in under the line, to what are the other legal challenges that could also be brought to bear to make this, to allow us to be able to stay on course with the project.
And I would agree with Lori in the sense that I think the majority of Portlanders didn't realize that they had voted in favor of this bond many years ago now, and now it could be in jeopardy of granted, we'd still use the bond money, but we'd have to go out potentially for more bond money if we wanted to do the reconstruction that we've been planning. Anyhow, I know that it's not necessarily the sky's falling right now, but it does feel very worrisome, particularly, again, without letting the public know as soon as possible. But I've certainly let as many people as I know about it. But I think if people in this group, if you haven't already voted, or you can let people know about this, just leave the word of mouth is really important right now too. And then the last thing is around, Lisa, you had mentioned with the new edition, if they do say, okay, you can just do the 15% for the roof on the new edition. I remember on last night's community forum where you reviewed the LEED, how close we are to getting LEED certified with the new edition, but it still looked like we weren't even quite there on what you're already looking at for LEED certification for the new edition. So would you have to then look at areas to subtract from the renovations to be able to meet that, even that 15% for the roof?
If it's just the 15, it's kind of a two-part question. So if it's just the 15%, we can look at the existing roof, and it's essentially just maybe sizing up some of the structure, or it may already be sized appropriately to handle that weight. So not too concerned if we need to accommodate that on the addition. In regards to your question about LEED, I believe we're tracking. So in LEED, you track it with yes columns, maybe columns, and no columns. And so 50 is our threshold that we have to meet. And right now we're tracking in the yes column 49, but we have a handful or two handfuls of strong maybes. And they stay there until we make sure we have all our I's dotted and T's crossed to where they can move over into that yes. And so there's a good handful of those there that we're examining to see which ones are most feasible to move over. So it's just, we don't want to say yes until it's 110%. And so I don't think that it's a concern. It's just how we track them at this time to make sure that everything's dialed in properly and that we're have everything accounted for, I guess.
Great, thank you. And if I can just ask one more question, it's not quite related. It's not related to the referendum at all. It's just regarding the bidding. And are you concerned at all around the cost of construction right now? I'm only asking this because we even have a neighbor that wanted to build an addition or a porch on their house, and the cost of lumber right now is astronomical. We could barely even get 2x4s at a reasonable price, like at Home Depot. So I'm just curious if you can speak a little bit about construction costs, and if you're feeling, I don't even know what it is in the market right now overall, but.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. In regards to lumber, that is one material that we have seen an increase in. And so what we're seeing right now is some materials are having increases. Lumber specifically, we've heard has had quite a big increase. But we're seeing different things. So depending on availability of contractors and things like that, depends on kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of contractors, they still have work on the books, but there's less work that's coming out. And so there have been recent bids that we've seen that have come in at or under budget, which we haven't seen in quite a while. So I can't say that that's going to be the norm, but that's definitely a positive sign. And again, a lot of it, it really is going to depend on, what other things are on in the market, what is happening, who's available, who's not. Subcontractors are still pretty busy, but as we're moving forward, what we're hearing is there's less and less work out there going forward because typically construction feels the impact of pandemics or recessions later. We're definitely, some materials are going up, but we're seeing some favorable bids at the same time some of those materials are going up. So that's kind of what we're seeing at this point.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, I don't see any more hands up. So if there aren't any more questions on this, I'll move on to the community forum update. Okay, so last night we had the community forum for Longfellow, and the agenda I'll kind of go through relatively quickly and hit on some of the more in-depth areas. We had our welcome and introductions. We did the review of the design statement that the community helped us put together, and the inventory of facility needs. We did a presentation of the floor plans and the renderings. We went over improvements to the school in response to COVID-19. We looked at the lead update and the project timeline and questions and answers. So to reflect on what we did at the first community forum, when we worked with the community to craft the design statement, that design statement read, nurturing the roots of community to grow the hearts and minds of learners for a dynamic world. And the priorities that have been identified are classroom upgrades and abatement, secure accessible entrance, elevator, code and accessibility upgrades. And the improvements for COVID-19 are twofold. So district-wide initiatives that are currently underway across the schools are UV air exchange units in nurse areas, including separation rooms, repairs to windows for ease of operation, installation of hand sanitizing stations, cleaning and servicing of ventilation systems, installation of ionizers. And those items that are improvements included in the renovation addition project are related to the reconfiguration of the nurse office, including separation and isolation areas, and touchless fixtures and new/renovated restrooms. So we had a lot of great discussion and questions that came out of the forum last night. These are the questions that we walked away with, and I'll go over what the questions were and what our responses were to those. One of the questions was, will the new addition have its own HVAC system? And yes, the addition is designed with a HVAC system. What was taken out of the scope regarding cost escalation? And so the original scope, as you all know, was more robust than what we've arrived at. And a lot of things regarding the envelope of the building or the exterior improvements to the facade were, the money was refocused to really focus on the educational spaces within the school. So those are some of the major areas that we saw the repurposing of funds and making sure that we address those areas. Is there a new road at the back of the school, the addition? So what folks have seen in any of the renderings, it's not a new road. It's essentially it's a service area for the loading area of the new warming kitchen. So it's not an actual road where cars will be coming back and forth on a regular. It's for deliveries to be able to access that area. If referendum question C passes, what are the cost impacts? If we're required to make the changes to the roof and energy efficiency, and how could this be permitted prior to the ordinance taking effect? We've already reviewed that in depth tonight, so we won't touch on that. Is there an impact to play spaces around the school? So we are trying to impact play areas as minimal as possible. The BALC addition does start to get close to some of that paved area, but we are maintaining that hardscape play area in the back of the building. Could Longfellow parents fundraise to update the playground? Absolutely. We worked with many, whether it be parents or organizations related to schools on, they fundraise for the playground equipment and have it installed as part of the project or shortly thereafter. So that's definitely something that can be done. Have school enrollments been updated to determine if they will go up or down? So when we started this process, we looked at the enrollment studies of the school and have accommodated what was predicted for these schools. I don't think anything has been updated since that. So the what was available at the time was accounted for. Does the proposed schedule address how students will use the school during construction? And the answer to that is yes. That is why you see the duration of construction. It's really to accommodate it being a phased occupied renovation, having the portables on site, having the students move in and out of the portables safely between the different construction times. Does the proposed, oh, I already read that one, sorry. Will there be another public comment session or forum? So there isn't one planned at this time, but as all of you know, all of the information that we present is on the website that's been created for the project, and there is a link for anybody that wants to ask questions, and we do address those when they come in. Air circulation in classroom could be better if we can make 2 windows open. And so this was in response to, we were addressing at least one window could easily be open. It doesn't mean that it will be the only window that will be open. I know that there is improvements that are being considered at the remaining operable windows throughout the district. So schedule and next steps. So right now we're in the construction document phase, wrapping that up. We just had our 3rd public forum. So we're right in this area right here. The planning board process is wrapping up and we are getting these documents ready to bid. Oh, I see a hand raised. Anne, did you have a question?
I do. My internet's been really wonky all night, so I apologize if I cut in and out. But I had a quick question about something you said earlier. And one of the questions I think that came out of the community forum was, can Longfellow families raise money to build or help rebuild the playground or the play space, whatever? And you said yes. So I know from the families in the Longfellow space, there's a big concern about equity among all the schools. So not that Longfellow can bring in more money or whatever, but it just depends on the population, obviously. And I know that the equity among all the schools has been an issue. So there's been in the PTO just a concern about spending too much money on the play space and like losing funds that we would get, maybe public funds we would get, and maybe representing something different from all the other schools and making sure that that's an equitable space, but also one that's focused on our kids too. So just to speak to that, I don't know if that's something you guys can speak to.
I guess is the question, can the PTO fundraise for the play structure? I guess I'm not quite clear on what the question is.
It sounds like it's, I think there's one question about can you fundraise, and tell me if I'm wrong. And
we've talked about this for a couple of years and bringing in money and yep.
I was going to say, is it about equity in the schools, and can one school fundraise perhaps better than another? Is that where you were going with that?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that the Longfellow PTO is concerned, like if we can raise the money to, if we did a big fundraiser to, sorry, my internet is really funny tonight. But if we could actually spend the time and get the buy-in and raise significant funds for our play space, like is that going to, if what we're bringing to Longfellow is going to defeat funds that we would get otherwise, or delete funds that we would get otherwise, and does that break into the sort of equity among all the other schools if we're raising a more significant amount for X versus Y or whatever? I think that's something that we've been mindful of and trying to balance.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to what we've seen in other districts, and maybe it applies is a lot of the PTO and fundraising is done almost after the project. So we come in, we can do the project, and then the play structures are modified as part of that PTO effort. So if it wants to be handled separately, but I can't really speak to maybe the perception of equity across that. I don't know if there's others that will want to speak to that.
Can I just add one thing on this? And you guys may have already checked it. And I think we did some fundraising separately on the hall project, but there may want to be a chat with bond counsel just to confirm about any fundraising that might go over the bonded amount, if it's separate, just to confirm that that's okay with bond counsel.
We can do that, but I think to Anne's point, I do think that there's, that some schools are able to raise money more easily than other schools. But I will, and Councilor Mavadonis just referenced this, the Row PTO did significant fundraising to go above and beyond what was included in the project for the new Hall Row School. So that's an example of fundraising that's been done by a PTO. And more recently, while the city did a significant upgrade to the Riverton, now Talbot School, a Riverton Community Center playground, the PTO at Talbot also raised significant money to be able to supplement and do some things that they thought were upgrades that they wanted. So that's not an unusual. As to whether it decreases equity, I guess I would argue that if a community has the resource, is able to raise those resources and doesn't draw as much from the public funds, that actually is at least equity oriented, as opposed to sort of having every school get the exact same amount and have a community that has the means not actually do some things that they could do for themselves.
Could I just throw in that this makes me think about the board's choice and way of working with some of our booster groups, because we're doing the difference between this and Row is we're doing 3 schools at once. And so I think Anne has raised a good point that it's very easy. The others have been one-offs and not connected to a city-funded bond funded project. Row was a state-funded school, different situation, which is why Nick, I think, is saying, wait a minute, because the way this funding works, it may have some different limitations. And this might be one where the board would want to think about pooling efforts, because Reiki or Presumpscot are in a different, socioeconomic landscape than Longfellow is. And Longfellow PTO has the ability to raise much more funds than probably either of the other two. And so you could end up with a city-funded school where the PTOs have provided very different playgrounds because it relied simply on the ability of that school to raise money. And so the model that we used with booster groups might be one to think about.
Yeah, I think that, just to let you guys know, I think that the Longfellow group is really mindful of that, and understanding that, yes, maybe Longfellow could bring in more money, but is that equitable amongst all the schools, and wanting to make sure that we're also mindful of that too. Obviously, we want the best for our students locally, but we want the best for our students in Portland. So how we can be mindful of that and not ostracize our other groups that we want to work with for other, other ventures and other community supported events as well. So.
Well, it sounds like some of this may be for administration or the school board to talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
I was just going to say that same thing, Nick. I honestly agree with the superintendent that if the PTO is eager and willing to raise money for anything related to their school, that's in their purview. And then this is something that if we find it to be in somewhat inequitable as a board or administration, that can be addressed there. But I think, again, in terms of, I appreciate the PTO of Longfellow keeping that in their minds in the forefront. But I really think, again, it's exciting to know that the PTO would be, interested and willing to fund, because we need community support. So I would say, please pass along to the PTO. Yeah, let's get started on fundraising. Again, better to probably wait till after the plans are started or even finished, simply because then you'll know more of the area that you have to work with for playground space and so forth. But
if I can just add that I'm sorry I misunderstood your point, Anne, and I do think it's awesome if the Longfellow PTO is trying to move this conversation to be more of a equity-driven one, where we're actually looking at the Longfellow community sort of uniting with the other communities to fundraise together for improvements that could be then used across the three schools. I think that's exactly what we talk about when we talk about our equity focus.
Not trying to add extra work to any of the school board, but it's just adding extra ideas. That's all.
Sounds like a great idea. The next slide that we have was just recapping the upcoming schedule. The DABC is scheduled to meet on the 19th, and we need to send out some revised dates for the BLAC as it falls right on the holiday. So we will get those dates out to everyone, as well as the order to which the BLACs will be conducted. And I think that's all we have for this evening. Are there any other questions that folks have?
I just want to say thank you again to all of our committee members. Thank you for hanging in there, and thank you very much to Harriman and all of the hard work you're doing, and particularly navigating as we head into this vote. Sounds like it's going to be very critical to stay ahead of it. So appreciate all your hard work.
Absolutely. Thank you all. It's been great to have such a group.
Yeah, I agree, Marty. Thanks.
Yeah. Right at 8:30. Good job, everybody. All right. Are we all done?
Yep.
Okay. Great.
All right.
Great.
Thank you all.
Good evening, everyone.
Thanks, guys. This is great. Thanks so much.